The 13th Tuesday, we talked about the perfect day. Morrie wanted to be cremated. He had discussed it with Charlotte, and they decided it was the best way. The rabbi from Brandis, Al Axelrod, a longtime friend whom they chose to conduct the funeral service, had come to visit Morrie, and Morrie told him of his cremation plans. And Al? Yes? Make sure they don't overcook me. The rabbi was stunned, but Morrie was able to joke about his body now. The closer he got to the end, the more he saw it as a mere shell, a container of the soul. It was withering to useless skin and bones anyhow, which made it easier to let go. We were so afraid of the sight of death, Morrie told me when I sat down. I adjusted the microphone on his collar, but it kept flopping over. Morrie coughed. He was coughing all the time now. I read a book the other day. It said as soon as someone dies in a hospital, they pull the sheets up over their head, they wheel the body to some chute and push it down. They can't wait to get it out of their sight. People act as if death is contagious. I fumbled with the microphone. Morrie glanced at my hands. It's not contagious, you know. Death is as natural as life. It's part of the deal we made. He coughed again, and I moved back and waited, always bracing for something serious. Morrie had been having bad nights lately, frightening nights. He could sleep only a few hours at a time before violent hacking spells woke him. The nurses would come into the room, pound him on the back, try to bring up the poison. Even if they got him breathing normally again, normally meaning with the help of an oxygen machine, the fight left him fatigued the whole next day. The oxygen tube was up his nose now. I hated the sight of it. To me, it symbolized helplessness. I wanted to pull it out. Last night, Morrie said softly. Yes, last night. I had a terrible spell. It went on for hours, and I really wasn't sure I was going to make it. No breath, no end to the choking. At one point, I started to get dizzy. Then I felt a certain peace. I felt that I was ready to go. His eyes widened. Mitch, it was the most incredible feeling, the sensation of accepting what was happening, being at peace. I was thinking about a dream I had last week where I was crossing a bridge into something unknown, being ready to move on to whatever is next. But you didn't. Morrie waited a moment. He shook his head slightly. No, I didn't. But I felt that I could. Do you understand? That's what we're all looking for, a certain peace with the idea of dying. If we know in the end that we can ultimately have that peace with dying, then we can finally do the really hard thing, which is make peace with living. He asked to see the hibiscus plant on the ledge behind him. I cupped it in my hand and held it near his eyes. He smiled. It's natural to die, he said again. The fact that we make such a big hullabaloo over it is because we don't see ourselves as part of the nature. We think because we're human, we're something above nature. He smiled at the plant. We're not. Everything that gets born dies. He looks at me. Do you accept that? Yes. All right, he whispered. Now here's the payoff. Here's how we are different from these wonderful plants and animals. As long as we can love each other and remember the feeling of love we had, we can die without ever really going away. All the love you created is still there. All the memories are still there. You live on in the hearts of everyone that you have touched and nurtured while you're here. His voice was raspy, which usually meant he needed to stop for a while. I placed the plant back on the ledge and went to shut off the tape recorder. The last sentence that Morrie got out before I did. Death ends a life, not a relationship. There had been the development and the treatment of ALS, an experimental drug that was just gaining passage. It was not a cure, but a delay, a slowing of the decay for perhaps a few months. Morrie had heard about it, but he was too far gone. Besides, the medicine wouldn't be available for several months. Not for me, Morrie said, dismissing it. And all the time he was sick, Morrie never held out hope that he would be cured. He was realistic to a fault. One time I asked if someone would wave a magic wand and make him all better, would he become in time the man that he were before? He shook his head. No way I could go back. I'm a different self now. I'm different in my attitudes. I'm different appreciating my body, which I didn't do fully before. I'm different in terms of trying to grapple with the big questions, the ultimate questions, the ones that won't go away. That's the thing, you see. Once you get your fingers on the important questions, you can't turn away from them. And which are the important questions? As I see it, they have to do with love, responsibility, spirituality, awareness. And if I were healthy today, those would still be my issues. They should have been all along. I tried to imagine Morrie healthy. I tried to imagine him pulling the covers from his body, stepping from that chair, the two of us going for a walk around the neighborhood, the way we used to walk around campus. I suddenly realized that it had been 16 years since I'd seen him standing up. 16 years. What if you had one day, perfectly healthy, I asked. What would you do? 24 hours? 24 hours. Let's see. I'd get up in the morning, do my exercises, have a lovely breakfast of sweet rolls and tea, go for a swim, and then have my friends come over for a nice lunch. I'd have them come one or two at a time so that we can talk about their families, their issues, talk about how much we mean to each other. Then I'd like to go for a walk in a garden with some trees, watch their colors, watch the birds, take in the nature that I haven't seen in so long now. In the evening, we'd all go together to a restaurant with some great pasta, maybe some duck. I love duck. And then we danced the rest of the night. I danced with all the wonderful dance partners out there until I was exhausted. And then I'd go home and have a deep, wonderful sleep. That's it. That's it. It was so simple, so average, I was actually just a little disappointed. I figured he'd fly to Italy or have lunch with the president or romp on the seashore or try every exotic thing he could think of. After all these months lying there, unable to move a leg or foot, how could he find perfection in such an average day? Then I realized this was the whole point. Before I left that day, Morrie asked if he could bring up a topic. Your brother, he said. I felt a shiver. I do not know how Morrie knew this was on my mind. I had been trying to call my brother in Spain for weeks and had learned from a friend that he was flying back and forth to a hospital in Amsterdam. Mitch, I know it hurts when you can't be with someone you love, but you need to be at peace with his desires. Maybe he doesn't want you interrupting your life. Maybe he can't deal with that burden. I tell everyone I know how to carry on with the life they know. Don't ruin it because I'm dying. But he's my brother, I said. I know, Morrie said. That's why it hurts. I saw Peter in my mind when he was 8 years old, his curly blonde hair puffed into a sweaty ball atop his head. I saw us wrestling in the yard next to our house, the grass stains soaking through the knees of our jeans. I saw him singing songs in front of the mirror, holding a brush as a microphone, and I saw us squeezing into an attic where we hid together as children, testing our parents' will to find us for dinner. And then I saw him as an adult who had drifted away, thin and frail, his face bony from the chemotherapy treatments. Morrie, I said, why doesn't he want to see me? My old professor sighed. There is no formula to relationships. They have to be negotiated in loving ways with room for both parties. What they want, what they need, what they can do, and what their life is like. In business, people learn and win. They negotiate to get what they want. Maybe you're too used to that. Love is different. Love is when love is when you are concerned about someone else's situation as you are about your own. You've had these special times with your brother, and you no longer have what you had with him. You want them back. You never want them to stop, but that's part of being human. Stop, renew, stop, renew. I looked at him. I saw all the death in the world. I felt helpless. You'll find a way back to your brother, Morrie said. How do you know? Morrie smiled. You found me, didn't you? I heard a nice little story the other day, Morrie says. He closed his eyes for a moment and I wait. Okay. The story's about a little wave, bobbing in the ocean, having a grand old time. He's enjoying the wind and the fresh air until he notices the other waves in front of him crashing against the shore. My God, this is terrible, the wave says. Look what's going to happen to me. Then along comes another wave. It sees the first wave looking grim and it says to him, why do you look so sad? The first wave says, you don't understand, we're all going to crash. All of us waves are going to be nothing. Isn't it terrible? The second wave says, no, you don't understand, you're not a wave, you're a part of the ocean. I smile. Morrie closes his eyes. Part of the ocean, he says. Part of the ocean. I watch him breathe, in and out, in and out. The 14th Tuesday, we say goodbye. It was cold and damp as I walked up the steps to Morrie's house. I took in the little details, things I hadn't noticed for all the times I'd visited. The cut of the hill, the stone facade of the house, the pachysandra plants, the low shrubs. I walked slowly, taking my time, stepping on dead wet leaves that flattened beneath my feet. Charlotte had called the day before to tell me Morrie was not doing well. This is her way of saying the final days had arrived. Morrie had canceled all of his appointments and had been sleeping much of the time, which was unlike him. He never cared for sleeping, not when there were people he could talk with. He wants you to come visit, Charlotte said. But Mitch? Yes? He's very weak. The porch steps, the glass in the front door. I absorbed these things in a slow, observant manner, as if seeing them for the first time. I felt the tape recorder in the bag on my shoulder, and I unzipped it to make sure I had tapes. I don't know why I always had tapes. Connie answered the bell. Normally buoyant, she had a drawn look on her face. Her hello was spoken softly. How's he doing? I said. Not so good, she bit her lower lip. I don't like to think about it. He's such a sweet man, you know? I knew. This is such a shame. Charlotte came down the hall and hugged me. She said that Morrie was still sleeping, even though it was 10 a.m. We went into the kitchen. I helped her straighten up, noticing all the bottles of pills lined up on the table, a small army of brown plastic soldiers with white caps. My old professor was taking morphine now to help ease his breathing. I put the food I had brought with me into the refrigerator: soup, vegetable cakes, tuna salad. I apologized to Charlotte for bringing it. Morrie hadn't chewed food like this in months, and we both knew that, but it had become a small tradition. Sometimes when you're losing someone, you hang on to whatever tradition you can. I waited in the living room where Morrie and Ted Koppel had done their first interview. I read the newspaper that was lying on the table. 2 Minnesota children had shot each other playing with their father's guns. A baby had been found buried in a garbage can in an alley in Los Angeles. I put down the paper and stared into the empty fireplace. I tapped my shoe lightly on the hardwood floor. Eventually, I heard the door open and close, then Charlotte's footsteps coming towards me. All right, she said softly. He's ready for you. I rose and I turned to our familiar spot. Then I saw a strange woman sitting at the end of the hall in a folding chair, her eyes on a book, her legs crossed. This was a hospice nurse, part of the 24-hour watch. Morrie's study was empty. I was confused. Then I turned back hesitantly to the bedroom, and there he was, lying in bed under the sheet. I had only seen him like this one other time, when he was getting massaged, and the echo his aphorism, "When you're in bed, you're dead," began anew inside my head. I entered, pushing a smile onto my face. He wore a yellow pajama-like top, and then a blanket covered him from the chest down. The lump of his forearm was so withered that I almost thought there was something missing. He was as small as a child. Morrie's mouth was open, and his skin was pale and tight against his cheekbones. When his eyes rolled towards me, he tried to speak, but I only heard a soft grunt. There he is, I said, mustering all the excitement I could find in my empty till. He exhaled, shut his eyes, and smiled, the very effort seeming to tire him. My dear friend, he finally said. I am your friend, I said. I'm not so good today. Tomorrow will be better. He pushed out another breath and forced a nod. He was struggling with something beneath the sheets, and I realized he was trying to move his hands toward the opening. Hold, he said. I pulled the covers down and grasped his fingers. They disappeared inside my own. I leaned in close, a few inches from his face. It was the first time that I had seen him unshaven, the small white whiskers looking so out of place, as if someone had shaken salt neatly across his cheeks and chin. How could there be new life in his beard when it was draining everywhere else? Morrie, I said softly. Coach, he corrected. Coach, I said. I felt a shiver. He spoke in small bursts, inhaling air, exhaling words. His voice was thin and raspy. He smelled of ointment. You are a good soul. A good soul. Touched me, he said. He moved my hands to his heart. Here. It felt as if I had a pit in my throat. Coach? Ah? I don't know how to say goodbye. He patted my hand weakly, keeping it on his chest. This is how we say goodbye. He breathed softly in and out. I could feel his rib cage rise and fall. Then he looked right at me. Love you, he rasped. I love you too, Coach. No, you do. No, something else. What else do you know? You always have. His eyes got small and then he cried, his face contorting like a baby who hasn't figured out his tear ducts work. I held him close for several minutes. I rubbed his loose skin. I stroked his hair. I put a palm against his face and felt the bones close to the flesh and the tiny wet tears, as if squeezed from a dropper. When his breathing approached normal again, I cleared my throat and said, I knew he was tired, so I'd be back next Tuesday, and I expected him to be a little more alert, thank you. He snorted lightly, as close as he could come to a laugh. It was a sad sound just the same. I picked up the unopened bag with the tape recorder. Why had I even brought this? I knew we would never use it. I leaned in and kissed him closely, my face against his, whiskers on whiskers, skin on skin, holding it there longer than normal. Okay then, I said, pulling away. I blinked back the tears, and he smacked his lips together and raised his eyebrows at the sight of my face. I like to think that it was a fleeting moment of satisfaction for my dear old professor. He had finally made me cry. Okay then, he whispered. Graduation. Morrie died on a Saturday morning. His immediate family was with him in the house. Rob made it in from Tokyo. He got to kiss his father goodbye. And John was there, and of course Charlotte was there, and Charlotte's cousin Marcia, who had written the poem that moved Morrie at his unofficial memorial service. The poem that likened him to a tender sequoia. They slept in shifts around his bed. Morrie had fallen into a coma 2 days after our final visit, and the doctor said he could go at any moment. Instead, he hung on through a tough afternoon, through a dark night. Finally, on the 4th of November, when those he loved had left the room for just a moment to grab coffee in the kitchen, the first time none of them were there with him since the coma began, Morrie stopped breathing. And then he was gone. I believe he died this way on purpose. I believe he wanted no chilling moments, no one to witness his last breath and be haunted by it, the way he had been haunted by his mother's death, no his telegram or by his father's corpse on the city morgue. I believe he knew that he was in his own bed, that his books and notes and his small hibiscus plant were nearby. He wanted to go serenely, and that's how he went. The funeral was held on a damp, windy morning. The grass was wet, and the sky was the color of milk. We stood by the hole in the earth, close enough to hear the pond water lapping at the edge and to see ducks shaking off their feathers. Although hundreds of people had wanted to attend, Charlotte had kept his gathering small, just a few close friends and relatives. Rabbi Axelrod read a few poems. Morrie's brother David, who still walked with a limp from his childhood polio, lifted the shovel and tossed dirt in the grave, as per tradition. At one point, when Morrie's ashes were placed into the ground, I glanced around the cemetery. Morrie was right. It was indeed a lovely spot. Trees and grass and a sloping hill. You talk, I'll listen, he had said. I tried doing that in my head, and to my happiness found that I imagined conversation felt almost natural. I looked down at my hands and saw my watch and realized why. It was Tuesday.